Thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you getting on our weekly update. Again, some housekeeping rules. Please keep your lines muted and use the chat feature for conversing with Melissa and John. And be sure to form your questions to everyone and not just to Eric. That way we can make sure everybody sees the question that's coming through. And with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to John to kick us off.
Thank you, Hope, and as always, thank you, Melissa, for sharing your insight with us today, and welcome to everyone on the call. I want to once again thank our sponsors, Dell Technologies, for helping to make these weekly events possible. Dell has been very generous with their support of not just the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association, but many associations across the country throughout this crisis, and we appreciate Dell and their terrific support. I would remind you that today's call is for the benefit of our hotel, restaurant, and travel and tourism partners, as well as suppliers to the industry. And it's not, and it is off the record, so it's not designed for press purposes. So we're happy to respond to any press inquiries about what's happening relative to our industry. But that's not this time today. So if you're with the press and you're signed into the session, please disconnect at this time. And with that, I would be happy to introduce Melissa Bova to kick us off. Melissa?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We are in, I don't even know how many weeks we've been doing these webinars, but every week I think that I have less to talk about. And then as I start putting my notes together, I come up with more things to talk about. And as I did warn many of you last week, we are entering a little bit more of the realm of legislation. So I will reiterate what John said before. This call is strictly for PRLA members and people in the industry. And if you are from the press, please disconnect. This is not the webinar for you today. So let me jump right into federal, where I always start, and then we will trickle down into other items. And we have a few PPP updates. As you know, the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act was signed by the president. It did become law. And also, as you know, last week I said we're still waiting for some guidance from Treasury. As we are with everything else, a law is passed. It looks great. And then we determine how Treasury is going to interpret it. And my cautious optimism last week was that Treasury would be a little bit more lenient in terms of some of the P3 provisions than they were in the past. And that has actually been the case. So some changes that they have clarified in an interim rule eliminates what we refer to as the cliff. And this was a nightmare for many of you before as it pertained to the P3. So when it was 80, 75, 25, I've already forgotten it because it was that terrible. If you didn't hit that 75 for payroll, you could potentially have been subject to having to repay the entire loan. It wouldn't be forgiven. Now with 60/40, they have clarified that there will not be the 60% cliff. So if you aren't able to use the entire 60% for payroll, what you are able to use will be factored into being forgiven. So the remainder would still become a loan, but it wouldn't be the entirety of the loan that would become a loan that you need to pay back. So portions of it will be forgiven, and Treasury has included that in its final rule. Further to that point, if you received your P3 before June 5th, you can either use the 8 weeks as the P3 was originally designed for, or choose to use 24 weeks. So if you pulled down your loan before June 5th, you can either stick with the 8 if that's what you're operating with, and I know some of you are operating with June 5th, or you can choose to do 24. To that end, we've also said, and you need to talk to your banks about this, I'll reiterate this again, in the original P3 in the guidance, if it turned into a loan, you only had 2 years to pay it off. This legislation gives you 5 years, but if you've already signed into that agreement with your bank, that's a conversation you need to have with your bank in terms of forgiveness of going from 2 years to 5 years to repay any of the loan if you do not use it for the 60/40 split. Some other items to keep in mind with all of this. There is, as of last week, $130 billion left in the fund for the P3. So if you are eligible for the P3 and you have not drawn down upon it, I think it's something that you might want to consider, and there's a few reasons for that. One, June 30th is the deadline. If you don't apply and draw the loan down by June 30th, poof, it's gone. No one's getting any money from the P3 unless there's legislation. And we've seen how timing-wise can impact our ability to get legislation passed. So if you're interested in the P3, make sure you draw down on it, you apply by June 30th. And to that end, the application to apply for the P3 has been updated to reflect some of these changes that I've already mentioned. So if you draw down between now and the end of the month, you would have 5 years to pay off anything that's not forgiven. You would have 24 weeks. A lot of these extensions of forgiveness, if you are unable to bring back your full-time equivalent employees based on last year, all of these items are part of the P3 now. So if you have not drawn down on it, it really is something you might want to consider. To that end, another item to keep in mind, if you haven't already, but I'm pretty sure every business owner has this date marked on their calendar. As of right now, the end of July, that extra $600 a week your employees are getting that they're saying they don't want to come back to work because they're getting it, that goes away at the end of July. So if you pull down the P3 by the end of June, those employees by the end of July, all of a sudden are going to want to start working again because they're not getting the incentive to stay on unemployment anymore. So that's another reason that if you're worried about not being able to bring employees back, I think that we will see some of those employees that were less willing before to be a little bit more willing to come back as it pertains to that $600 potentially going away at the end of July. To that end, Congress, the Democrats in the House did pass language that would extend the $600. The Senate is not considering it. So as of right now, that last week of July is the last week for the extra $600 a week from the federal government. I know that we probably have a number of questions regarding the forgiveness and kind of how the 60% is different from the 75% before. And surprise, surprise, we are still waiting for that guidance from the Treasury Department. And that's really going to be key in terms of the ability, before you had to turn people into for unemployment, you had all of these steps you had to do when it was 75-25. We are working on getting kind of a one-page forgiveness document that will really streamline the ability for your loan to be forgiven. That is not out there yet. So a lot of those kind of super unanswered questions, we don't have the details with, but the expectation is that Treasury will be taking that, I believe it was an 11-page forgiveness document, and tailoring it down and making it much more simple for all of you. So stay tuned for that. And as I said, if you have not tapped into the P3, it's just something you might want to think about, especially with all the changes that finally have reflected the state of our industry and the help that we need in the unique scenario that we are all at right now. Let's jump to state. Let's just jump right into it. So they're not in session this week. The House and Senate are not in session. The House is returning next week, and the Senate may return next week. As I mentioned before, they don't usually sunshine until the last week, but we do expect both chambers to be in next week as of right now. But don't worry, because all of the local municipalities are keeping me busy enough that just because they're not in Harrisburg, we're still plenty busier than I ever wanted to be in terms of local issues right now. This is the question I touched upon last week. I'm going to talk about it a little bit again today because I continue to get calls about this. A resolution was passed last week. It was all over the news that would end the governor's emergency declaration. I did tell you last week, don't pay attention to it because this is going to go through a court battle. And at the end of the day, the governor still has unilateral control unless the courts say otherwise. Unfortunately, we had some very excited legislators who, the day after it passed, did all of these press conferences and social media posts saying everything's back to normal and you can ignore all of the guidelines that you need to follow. The day after that, many of them backpedaled and said, gosh darn it, Governor, why do you keep on making our lives difficult, and acknowledge that you still need to follow the red, yellow, and green rules as they've been stipulated by the governor and the Secretary of Health. There is no change on any of that this week. The Senate has sent a complaint to the Commonwealth Court, the more I don't want to say conservative, but the more conservative of the court options. And on another note, the governor has gone to the Supreme Court to ask the state Supreme Court to authorize the fact that he has this ability to do the emergency declaration, and the resolution passed by the House and Senate should be null and void. So as of right now, and neither court has heard the cases, we've had no ruling from either court. The Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court rules with the governor, that's boom, it's over. If they rule against the governor, boom, it's over. The Commonwealth Court rules with the Senate, we could expect the governor to appeal to the Supreme Court. So all of the guidelines that are in place that are making you go a little crazy right now are going to continue to make you go a little crazy because they're not going away. So please do not take the risk. And it drives me a little crazy sometimes because everybody says reopen, reopen, reopen. And I wonder if they're going to be there when your license gets pulled. But just please continue, toe the line. Let's get through this. Let's get to bright green or normal green without putting any of your grant or any of your licenses at risk. And they are still at risk right now. Trust me. Like I said, I've never seen Department of Ag and the LCE more active than they have been since we've had outdoor dining and started at the beginning of indoor dining in some counties. All right, let's talk about some grant programs that we're working on. This was in the daily update, I think 2 days ago, and then yesterday as well. This is a piece of legislation we're working on with Representative Todd Stevens and Representative Aaron Coffer, and it's called the Small Business Recovery, I think the Mom and Pop, actually, Restaurant Recovery Grant Program. And we are still finalizing the legislation, but the general gist of this grant program is it would allow restaurants between 1 and 10 locations that have less than 75 employees per location and have lost 50% of sales during the months of April and May due to COVID would be eligible as of right now to a $25,000 grant. This is just proposed legislation right now. So don't get excited because every day I see the governor giving away more CARES Act money to other entities. But it is a $250 million pot of money that we're hoping to allow you to draw down from. We are looking at it. We're trying to figure out, pulling some data to figure out how many restaurants would be eligible. Is 25,000 enough, or do we need to move that number? But generally, we expect that legislation to be introduced in the next day or two. To that end, I do know, I've heard from a few hotels about a hotel grant program. I have a call with the sponsors of this grant program, the restaurant one, to see if they are willing to incorporate hotels. But generally, I think we would need to look at a separate grant program for hotels. And I think part of the hurdle that we have there for all of my hotel properties, especially that are part of a brand, is the perception that you are part of a large brand and you don't need the assistance. So if we do go down that path looking at something like that, that's going to need to have a lot of clarification, and we're going to need to find a prime sponsor that understands the nuances of the hotel industry. But right now, this one is just for restaurants. I'll take a try it, including hotels, but I make no promises since Representative Stevens and Representative Coffer seem very passionate about the mom and pop restaurant industry in this specific bill. Second, for my destination marketing organizations, I've talked to a few of you. We are still banging the drum on a grant program for those of you. I had a conversation with Representative Jack Rader yesterday. He is interested in prime sponsoring legislation that would create a small grant program for destination marketing organizations. We would be looking at potentially taking whatever hotel tax revenue you did not receive potentially during the month of April and making you whole for that month. So we are working with him on that grant program, and that's something that we hope to have more information on within the next couple of weeks. So the CARES Act money is being given away, and it's going away. And we are hoping to capture some of it to help the industry, also recognizing, and I think the legislature has recognized this as well, the hope that in the next COVID-4 recovery package that Congress might consider that it will include more of those funds to help not only the states try to balance their budget, because every state's budget is out of whack, but also include more funds for grant programs like this. So we're going to continue to work on this. We have been hearing a bit of a rumor. Typically, the legislature breaks at the end of June because the budget's passed. We've been hearing a few rumors that they might return to session at some point over the summer. This is literally my job as a lobbyist, is just taking rumors and trying to determine the truth. I think if we see another recovery package from the Fed, we might see the legislature return in terms of figuring out that money and maybe ironing out some other priorities. So I do not think that we are done in terms of grant programs, liability protection, all of those things that might be put on hold while they take a break over the next few weeks. They're not going to go away, and the legislature continues to recognize the need to help our industry especially get through this. Let's get to the depressing slide of the day. So just while you guys are trying to figure out how to get through the other side of this crisis, local governments are looking at all of this and thinking, how can we put more mandates on business? Yay! Philadelphia, we have the good and then we have the truly heinous. So we'll start there and then we'll trickle down. For those of you in Philadelphia, we have legislation that moved out of committee last week that does cap delivery fees. I talked about this on the webinar last week. It came out of committee unanimously. So in Philadelphia, your third-party delivery fees, they can only charge a maximum of 10% for the delivery and 5% for credit card processing, just because they want to charge you more. Anything in between with a total cap of 15%. That legislation is expected to pass council next Thursday, the 25th. We expect the mayor to sign it. Then the administration testified in support of it. And that legislation, as I said, will cap fees at 15%. And that will continue throughout the length of the crisis. And then for 90 days, once the declaration, the emergency declaration ends, recognizing that we will not be back to normal in Philadelphia or anywhere in the state anytime soon. So that legislation should be passed next week. Let's talk a little bit, and I don't know how many people I have from Philadelphia here, but please clear your schedule for another potential Zoom call that will occur tomorrow or Friday. And that is because of a bill that has been introduced by Councilmember Brooks relating to public health emergency leave. This legislation applies to all businesses, whether you have 2 employees or 1,000 employees. And it requires a business, if an employee says that they perceive that they might have been subject to COVID, they have a family member that could be high risk, they are having trouble traveling on the bus to get to their work, it pretty much gives an excuse or a reason for any employee not to work because they're worried about COVID, and you need to pay them 112 hours of paid leave for them to stay home. And that would be, if an amendment goes through, it'd be effective from here on out. So as you're bringing your employees back, this legislation, for any reason, and this is on top of Families First, because it goes above and beyond Families First, would require up to 112 hours of paid leave. And there will be, from my Philadelphia people who have tipped employees, there will be a provision in there that you will have to pay them probably what they would have made in tips as it pertains to this. This legislation in Philadelphia, and then I'll get off my Philadelphia rant, there is no question that it will decimate not only the hospitality industry, but the entire business community, but especially the hospitality industry. And quite honestly, we believe it could be the thing that breaks a restaurant trying to operate within the city of Philadelphia. So this is not a piece of legislation I'm willing to negotiate on. This is certainly not a piece of legislation that we think is fair to an industry that's completely decimated, especially when we have Families First protections out there for businesses and employees. So they will not listen to me in city council. So if any of my Philadelphia friends are on this call, as I said, please prepare for another Zoom call, because we're going to need every single one of you to activate on this legislation, because there is a push to get it passed before they break, and it is effective immediately. So please stay tuned for that. That is literally the scary beast that is breathing down our necks in Philadelphia right now. For Pittsburgh, there is a hearing and probably a committee vote tomorrow on paid leave in Allegheny County. So that should have been reversed. But Pittsburgh already passed paid sick leave. Those of you in Pittsburgh, are very familiar with paid sick leave, Allegheny County Council is expected to pass the same piece of legislation. For those of you in Allegheny County and not Pittsburgh, I sent an email last week informing you of this, asking you to outreach and asking you to let me know if this is a concern to you, and I didn't hear back from a single person. So it's hard for me to fight a bill if I'm not hearing from people saying that this will hurt them, and especially since we think this is going to pass in some form, we are going to make a move to try and push back effective dates to get us through the crisis. But generally, without any outreach or engagement from the industry in Allegheny County, this is going to pass in the form that it has been filed. So if you have not engaged on this in Allegheny County and you don't plan to, please expect to be offering paid leave to your employees if you do not already. And that is 1 hour for every 35 hours worked, up to 40 hours a year, and of course with parameters of how that leave can be used. Continuing down the black hole of local legislation, Allentown has also, Pittsburgh seems to be the new model. We have a council member there that is planning to introduce a paid sick leave mandate modeled after the city of Pittsburgh. From what I'm hearing, this is not something that's going to be passed within the next few weeks. It will probably roll over to the fall. But this, I said it last week and I'll say it again, these mandates are going to keep on popping up. And we need to be prepared for that. And if this is a concern for you, you need to be prepared to engage on that front, especially with your elected officials. So for those of you that have participated in our restaurant roundtables and everything in between, this is the reason why we do that, so you can establish those relationships. So please keep an eye out for that. And like I said, even though they're not in session in Harrisburg, I'm certainly keeping busy enough in other places around the state. So stay tuned. And as I said, for my Philadelphia friends, if you can give me 30 minutes tomorrow or Friday, date and time to be determined, I would much appreciate that as we try to kill this bill in the city of Philadelphia. Let's get to reopening, which I'm pretty sure is where all of the questions are going to be today. So red to yellow, we have Philadelphia dining there. Last week, Philadelphia did begin to allow outdoor dining. That was only for previously approved sidewalk cafes. Further extending that, Philadelphia did put out an application on Friday at 5 o'clock that allows restaurants and hotels to extend their outdoor dining capabilities. So they could extend their sidewalk cafes. If they don't have a sidewalk cafe, they can get a sidewalk cafe ability. They can go into, I think we're calling them streeteries, to go into parking spaces, also extending into parking lots. Basically, all of the things that a lot of municipalities have already done. It just takes us longer to do it in Philadelphia. But we have had some phenomenal champions within City Council. Councilman Dom, Councilman Heenan have been helping with that. And if you are a restaurant in Philadelphia and you're looking to extend your premise, that application needs to be filled out and turned in. To that end, they have to turn it around to you in 3 days. So it's not automatic approval like when you do your extension of premise with the LCB. In Philadelphia, to extend, they have 3 days to respond to you. So if you have not turned it in and you turn it in today, you might not get approved until next Monday. So please submit if you're looking to extend your ability to offer food or your sidewalk cafe. Do that sooner than later. I have outdoor dining in yellow because it's a reminder to me, because I keep on forgetting about it sometimes. Yeah, if you are still in yellow, you cannot have any indoor dining, any indoor service whatsoever, no exceptions. That's the rule. And sometimes I forget about it because all I think about is 25 in yellow without delineating between the two. So this is a reminder to you and a reminder to me. I know a lot of people are getting requests after funeral services, things like that. You can do that outdoors. You cannot have any indoor dining of any kind in yellow. So reiterating that. Some guidance for green counties. I know we have, and I think John has an update as it pertains to catering. Generally, guidance for green counties has remained unchanged. We did get a number of changes last week, which I reviewed on the webinar last week. I will not go through them again. But to keep in mind that music is fine. You can have live music. You can have acoustic music. You can have dance floors. All of that is permitted, and those changes, like I said, were put into effect. John, do you want to speak on the update for catering, and then I'll go into some warnings for people?
Sure. The one update that came out just this morning, and it should be posted now, is that on the original, when they added catering to the guidelines for restaurants, they mentioned that there needed to be a guest list maintained by the venue. It would be the guest and the place of origin of that guest. We worked with the governor's office on it. They agreed that it would be okay to have the requirement be that the host needs to maintain the guest list, not the venue, which will save some paperwork on your part. So you're, I don't have the exact wording right in front of me right now. Melissa might have it nearby, but it essentially says that you need to notify the host that they need to maintain a guest list, which includes the place of origin of each guest and their phone number. But the venue doesn't have to do that. It's up to the host.
In addition, here, I'll read it because it has another, this is really something special. All private event spaces and wedding venues with food service authorized to conduct in-person activities must require hosts to maintain a list of all guests in attendance, including phone number and their expected location 14 days after the event. So that is something that your brides and grooms are going to need to keep track of under this updated guidance. Some items to note, and then I do have a question about, God forbid, what happens if an employee contracts COVID. So I'm going to go through the rules and regulations there. But we have had a few items flagged, and I know it's none of you on this call, but maybe it's one of your neighbors who aren't smart enough to participate in my weekly call. Masks for employees. Your employees are required to wear masks unless they have a medical condition or unless it interferes with their ability to do their jobs. I know, especially in the T, nobody's wearing masks. Your guests aren't wearing masks, and your employees are annoyed that they have to wear masks. But they need to wear masks. And if they don't, the spread is going to continue. And to that end, when LCE or AG is coming in to inspect the premises, they're jotting down that your employees are not wearing masks. So when it comes to liability protection or things like that, they are noting if you are not enforcing that requirement. So as I said, if it improves with their ability to do their job or they have a medical condition, those are their two excuses. An excuse to not wear a mask does not include I don't want to, or it makes my face itchy, or I'm hot. John, do you want to, I know you had an update on that mask piece to put the fear of God into people.
Well, I just wanted to talk briefly about it because there seems to be no question that the two things that are the most effective in preventing spread of the virus are social distancing and wearing face coverings or masks. And we're seeing some states with a resurgence of cases, and most notably Texas, which has now surpassed Pennsylvania. And their guidelines actually are no less stringent than Texas or than Pennsylvania's. But the problem is that the people, from what the reports I'm getting, are not taking it seriously, and they're not social distancing, and they're not wearing face coverings. And these numbers, by the way, I've been told, are adjusted for increased testing. So it's not just because they have increased testing. The most important thing is to keep people safe. And then the second most important thing is we don't want to have a backslide and have to move back from green into yellow, or God forbid for yellow into red. So diligence is appreciated. The governor's office is highly complimentary of our industry after the first weekend in green, that they had no reports of really terrible violations. But we did, the Department of Ag reached out to us yesterday and asked us if we would help to reinforce the importance of wearing face coverings. And we're going to work with them in that regard. It's not going to change the rules. The rules still are that employees have to wear them unless they can't do their job or they have a medical problems. And guests, and you're required to tell guests that they're required to wear them, which is most easily done by a sign on your door and maybe places throughout the establishment if you want to be extra diligent. But they don't expect you to be the policeman. You've heard Melissa say this before, but your team members may be concerned if there's a high, if you're very lenient about guests wearing face coverings too, because it does put them at risk. So just want to reinforce how important that is for us to continue to move forward rather than backwards, as some other states are doing right now.
And the other item, and I noted it because I went out for drinks last week, and Hope was with me, and I think Hope might not go out for drinks with me anytime soon because I was flagging all of the items that I could see that weren't being followed. But something that is being very strictly enforced, that I know none of you on the call this applies to, is the 6 feet of social distancing between tables. I know I said that if it's 5.5, don't lose sleep, but we're seeing 3 and 2, and especially in spaces in Philadelphia, it was a huge issue because you only had so much outdoor seating. The tables were inching closer and closer together. There is no wiggle room on that front. And in Philadelphia, especially, they will pull your license. They won't just give you a warning, they will pull your license. And around the state, there will be no wiggle room. You might get a warning first. But I know there is an effort to get back to normal and to see as many people as possible. But the social distancing is a non-negotiable. If I were to say there's one thing you have to check the box on regularly and consistently, it is that social distancing between tables. So please, those are the 2 items that have been flagged by the inspectors, by LCE, by Department of Ag, by local health inspectors. So these are not things that I'm just making up. These are things that we've been reached out to and have been requested to inform you about. So please, on those 2 fronts, be careful there. PLCB, I mentioned this last week, it's still an issue. If you are looking to extend your licensed premise, in some cases, if you're going in to reorder product, if your license is expired, the LCB has to manually authorize you to be able to do it because while they are not requiring you to renew your licenses, not all of their databases are aware of that. So for the expired license piece, I know that has been an issue. There's a ton of backlog at the LCB. So if you are having an issue, you can reach out to me. I will tell you they are about 3 days behind. So if you sent them an email or left them a voicemail on Friday, they're probably just getting back to you yesterday or today. So I know I get a lot of emails. I called, I left a message. They're just inundated right now. So if you do need help from the LCB, do not expect a same-day response. I can tell you they're doing the best they can to work through a system that is not COVID friendly. So they're doing the best they can. Please have some patience. We will certainly do our best to help you if you need it. But also, and I will say this again for PLCB Plus, if you have been operating for more than a year and you don't know your PLCB Plus password or login, but you have a liquor lawyer that's helped you with your licensing, they probably have that login for you. Because that's the only way you can renew your licenses or do any license adjustments, have to be through PLCB Plus. So I know some people say, I don't have a login. Somebody probably has it, you just don't know what it is. So I encourage you to reach out to them so you're not stuck in that 3-day delay as it pertains to the LCB getting back to you. And with that, and then I do want to talk about the question I get more than any other question in all of the questions is, and it's multiple, and some of you are on this webinar, so I'm calling you out hypothetically here, is when will my county turn green? I would love to tell you with authority when you will turn green. I would love to do that. I would be the most beloved person in the world if I could do that. I can tell you what I think. I can tell you what I want to believe. It is the governor and the health department that make that determination, and they do not make that announcement until Friday. So I know everybody wants to know. I know you want to plan. You will always get a week's notice before you turn green. So for all of you that are hearing, they're going to announce that Berks County is going green on Friday. That's not the case. They may announce that Berks County is going to go this Friday, that Berks will go green on the 26th. But there's no scenario except for Center County, because at one time Center County was special. All of you in Center County know how special you are. There will always be a week warning before you flip. So for all of my people who turned yellow on June 5th, the earliest you will possibly go green is the 26th. and I will not guarantee that you will go green, because they have until this Friday to determine who will go green. And Philadelphia, as I've already said more than once on this webinar, is a very special land where they make their own rules. So Philadelphia will probably be operating in a different space completely. So those of you that turned green or yellow on the 5th, your earliest to go green is the 26th. It will not be this Friday. It will not be any time before the 26th. So hopefully I stopped 2 or 3 text messages or emails in their tracks with that prediction. And with that, I think we're going to go to upcoming webinars.
Great. So tomorrow, Friday, we're going to be having a webinar with PA Career Link, which is a governmental agency. They're going to be talking about the employer solutions, how they can help you with posting jobs, finding employees, and how employees can use their services for finding positions too. So it's a really important service. It's not going to be a long webinar, so if you could join us on Friday, it'd probably be about a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. But it's some good resources that you could be using in your business in the upcoming months. We also, Barley Schneider will be having a reopening hospitality panel going over guidelines, risks, and they'll be available for questions. Temple University has an online master's program. They're going to be reviewing this program and the financial assistance that's available to PRLA members for taking the online coursework. And again, we will be back with Melissa next Wednesday on the 24th to talk about the comings and goings and what's happening in our industry over the last week. And then on the next slide, Eric. The HARP Cheers PA, Yingling's online auction that they're doing for HARP is concluding this week. Please take a look at it. There's some really great things going on their site, and some great prizes and gifts and things that you could look at, and it's going to go to a really great cause. I know there was a question about the HARP online application. It is still closed. We are still working through the first 1,000 applications received. When we have more funding in place and we are ready to reopen, we will definitely put that out through our social media channels and on our website to let you know when it is reopening. And then I'm going to turn over Pennsylvania Promise to you, John.
You bet. Thank you. I think you've heard about this every week since we started this, but we do have the Pennsylvania Restaurant Promise and also the Pennsylvania Hotel Promise, 2 separate documents. I would strongly advise that you pull that from our website. There's both the document, the guidance document itself, and a sign that you can put on your door of your restaurant or hotel, letting them know that you subscribe to it. And then also some best practices, not only for your team, but for the guests and things that are expected of team members and guests. The concept is to help the travelers recognize that we're doing a lot, and restaurant patrons, to try to help keep them safe, and that particular restaurant or hotel is taking extra precautions to try to help keep them safe. It's mostly designed to reassure the public to come back out. Even though the rules are becoming less stringent and we're starting to go through the opening phase, there's many people that are still uncomfortable coming back out, and this will help, I think, your establishment do so. It's all complimentary on behalf of PRLA. There's going to be some promotion of this through the tourism department and the Department of Community and Economic Development. So it would be a good thing for you to sign on to the program. There's no signature actually required. It's completely voluntary, but I think it will help your business and help our industry. Thank you.
Okay, the next slide, questions. I could look at my slide deck. I think it's questions. Okay, let's go to questions. Everyone's favorite part of the entire presentation, because you never know what I'm gonna say.
Melissa, are you gonna cover the one that Cynthia sent in?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, stop there. Let me pull up that document. We did get a question as it pertains, now that your employees are back, what happens if, God forbid, one of your employees is diagnosed with COVID, and what do you need to do? Especially as it pertains to other employees. I mean, I don't need to tell you, If one of your employees is diagnosed with COVID, they need to go home for 14 days. That's given. But the other question is what do you do for the employees that are left? So let me go through the guidance. You need to identify all employees who are in close contact within about 6 feet or for 10 minutes or more with the person who was confirmed with a probable or confirmed case of COVID. This has to begin from 48 hours before they were diagnosed till the end of the 14 days of which those employees could become sick. If any employee who was in close, you do not need to send people who were in close contact with this person home. They do not need to self-quarantine for 14 days unless a doctor has told them that they need to. So you are not required to make those employees self-quarantine. If they remain asymptomatic, they need to adhere to the CDC guidelines. And I know I will get that question. What are the CDC guidelines? Here you go. You need to take their temperature and all employees' temperatures for 14 days to ensure that employees that were involved with that person for 14 days. As long as the employee doesn't have a temperature or symptoms, they should self-monitor. Obvious reasons, they should be wearing a mask. This should be nothing because everybody's already wearing a mask, right? They should be wearing a face mask for 14 days after the last exposure. You can either offer them a face mask, which you already have to do, or you can approve one that they have. The employees that were close to the person that tested positive for COVID should maintain 6 feet and practice social distancing as work duties permit in the workplace. Also, you should be disinfecting everything. If one of those employees who came in contact with that individual starts displaying symptoms, this is common sense, you send them home and then they need to get tested. Also, you want to be disinfecting the building, increasing air exchange, and cleaning more than you ever have cleaned before for anything that a person who's tested positive has come in contact with. That's the CDC. Back to the state. And this is kind of beyond the CDC. If an affected employee, one of the people that you realize was close to the person who tested positive, they should be sent home immediately. Surfaces in the employee's workspace should be cleaned and disinfected. Information on other employees who had contact with the ill employee, you're basically doing contact tracing. So if somebody gets tested positive, you tell all the people around them that were close, you keep an eye on them. If another person tests positive, then you need to look at everybody who is around that person. And you also need to promptly notify employees who were close contacts with any known exposure at the business premises, consistent with confidentiality laws. And I will give you a 1-minute blurb on that. You are not supposed to say, Jen Smith came down with COVID. You need to say that an employee that you have been close with or that you have worked closely with has tested positive for COVID. I know. Your employees probably know exactly who tested positive, but your duty is not to tell them. And if they figure it out on their own, kudos to them. But your job is the confidentiality of not saying who it is. As always, if they have symptoms, you need to send them home. So if you have a case of COVID and something to think about, if you are a small restaurant and somebody tests positive for COVID, your best practice is just going to be to temperature check your employees when they come in every day. That's going to be your best bet in terms of protecting your employees. So sorry, thank you for that, Hope. I even pulled up the blurbs for Cynthia and I completely forgot. So
one of her questions was, do you have to notify the health department?
There is no, you can inform the health department. Once upon a time you were required to, but the hospital or the testing site will be notifying the health department that there is a positive case.
Got it.
And all of this information is not off the top of my head. I'm not that smart. This is in that business operational guidance that you all should be following. So this should not be new, but I'm always happy to reiterate. All right. Pertaining to a wedding ceremony taking place in a banquet facility room, if there is not food beverage served in the ceremony space, does it still follow under the 50% of fire code requirement? Is there any gray area loophole in considering the space a chapel, as it is a wedding ceremony where there is not max occupancy aside from the 250 guest max? And the answer to that is no, there is no wiggle room. So they do have private event spaces and wedding venues, which do not offer food service, are not subject to the food service guidance, but must follow all applicable provisions of the Commonwealth's guidance for businesses permitted to operate during the COVID-19 disaster emergency. And in this space, you are in the 50% occupancy because of the use of the room. So, and social distancing as well for those guests. And that's the answer to that piece. Next question. When holding a corporate meeting rather than a social event in private event space in a hotel, what are the occupancy guidelines in the green zone? 50% for the room, no more than 250 in a room. If you have individuals that are sitting classroom style, they need to be 6 feet apart from each other. So those are the rules for a corporate space in terms of that. So classroom style, they need to be separated 6 feet from each other. The same requirements, 50% occupancy, 250 person cap would apply in this scenario. Okay. The alcohol to go law also enacted the requirement that transaction scan devices be in place by July 20th. Has that changed at all, or are we still required to have those in place by July 20th? You are still required to have a transaction scan device by July 20th. They wanted you to have them immediately upon the bill being signed, and we did get that delay. So you do, if we are still at 50%, you are still choosing to sell mixed drinks to go, you need to procure a transaction scan device. If you go on our website for our resources, we have some that we have been able to source for you that will come at a discount. And there are some discount codes for that. So you can see all of that on our website. But there will be no change on that front. I was able to delay it. I was not able to make it go away completely. Thank you, Ben, for the guidance for businesses in the restaurant industry. Okay, regarding the P3 Flexibility Act, extending the spend deadline to 24 weeks. Last week you mentioned there was a possibility that those of us who did spend down right away within the 8 weeks and are almost out of P3, there might be another round available for us. Is there any more info about that? That will require a legislative fix. So that is going to require a congressional act. So that has not changed. We are hopeful that with the fact that there are billions of dollars of unspent P3 money, that is an option and that Congress will consider it, but it's not something that Treasury can decide. So it is going to have to be a piece of legislation that Congress considers when they return to session. Are we still able to resubmit with adjustments and recalculations with the P3 if we receive the P3 within the very first round of funding on April 15th? Yes, you should be able to apply these new rules to your P3 that you already drew down upon, but please check with your banks, because like I said, we're still waiting for what the new forgiveness documents look like. So you're definitely going to want to check with your banks in terms of how they're planning to handle that. This is, as we all said, this should have been fixed 2 months ago, but it wasn't. So now we're kind of stuck in this backpedaling for those of you who were smart and drew down first, how we can make sure that this can apply to you. So check with your banks, and we're still waiting, as I said, for the new forgiveness guidance from the Treasury. Is it a hard, fast cutoff that is June 30th or December 31st? Or do you have to have up to 24 weeks to get up to your FTE number? Like if you hit the FTE and use the money by October 31st, can you use that time period? You have to draw down and this is kind of what we're trying to figure out for forgiveness, and we hope to have good guidance on this soon. You have to draw down by June 30th. You also, I don't believe anything has changed in terms of you needing to use the funds. The December 31st is really an extension of you meeting that FTE requirement, as far as I understand. But we're waiting for Treasury to provide the guidance of what the December 31st caveat actually means. Can you sit on the money until November or October and use it then? I don't believe that's going to be permissible. I think that December 31st is going to be an ability for you to check a box on the FTE requirement, but we're still waiting for all of that guidance from Treasury. Okay. In the yellow zone, self-service buffets and beverage stations were not permitted for private events in a hotel. In the green guidelines, this restriction no longer appears to exist on the chart. Therefore, we permitted, provided we follow the spirit of the law and demonstrate an abundance of caution, display a wedding cake in a hotel ballroom at a wedding reception, which is a private event. Yes, I do love the abundance of caution. Like this just, I love people being careful. Yes, we were equally as pleasantly surprised, but the only ban on buffets, self-service, anything like that is in yellow. So in green, we believe that would be permissible. Now, will you want to take some extra precautions? Yes, but there is not a requirement or a ban on displaying food or buffets in the green stage. So yes, you can display the wedding cake with an abundance of caution and maybe make sure no kids that are sneezing get near it. Question from Facebook. The guidelines say in the green zone, we are allowed to let customers use unlicensed area to take their food and drink. Is this allowed in the yellow zone also? Yes, outdoors. Can't forget my own rules. If you are not extending your premise and somebody gets their takeout and they get their cocktail to go or their beer and they go to an unlicensed area and sit down and eat it, that is permissible. To that end, they are no longer on the licensed portion of your property, and I hope that your cops are forgiving because now they have an open container out in public. So that would be your issue with that. But as long as you have a kind municipality, or I know some municipalities are not enforcing open container, that would be permitted. And this was a change that happened with the updated guidance, because before it was no dice whatsoever. Once we were allowed the outdoor dining, the ability to consume food, even on the unlicensed premise, was permitted at that point as well. Yes, Bhavesh, I did mention that I am going to talk to them about including hotels and motels as part of the grant program. If you've applied for your extension of premise for outdoor and green, are you permitted to have a separate outdoor cash bar in that outdoor area? If it is still on your licensed premise, yes, you're essentially extending your restaurant, essentially. So in that scenario, since you're extending your premise, as long as the transaction is occurring on your licensed premise, that would be permitted. Can you share the exact draft of the restaurant grant program? We do not have an exact draft yet because we're still drafting the grant program. So the co-sponsorship memo is out, and that will be, once we have draft legislation, we'll put it out there. And Bob, to that point, I do want to remind all of you that there are other grant programs that are becoming available. Many of your counties received funding from the fiscal code bill. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. So some of your counties are required to develop a small business grant program. That's through your county government. In addition, another 100 million small business grant program was authorized last week from the governor that runs through your PDICs, your industrial corporations. So there are 2 grant programs floating out there for restaurants and hotels. So please take a look at that. For my DMOs, there are some exceptions there. That's why we're trying to create a grant program just for you. But don't bank on the grant program in the form that I'm working on, because I'm banking on $250 million, and I don't even know if we're going to have $250 million in the CARES Act. So I urge you, until this gets across the finish line and the governor signs it, look at those other grant programs that we've been including in the daily updates, because that is money you can access sooner that's guaranteed to be put out. Mine is just a hope that I can grab some funds. Could bed and breakfast that are mom and pop businesses be included in the restaurant grant program? I have to look at the definition. I'm not sure, Rose. I think it's a tax code that we're using in the bill. So I'm not sure bed and breakfast could be included, but as I just mentioned, there are those 2 other grant programs that are very specific in terms of if you haven't even drawn down the P3 to take advantage of. So definitely tap into those programs before you hang your hat on mine, because we still have a ways to go on that. PUA guidance in regards to the email that came out yesterday with a new data file based on the last number of your Social Security. If you filed on Sunday, you still file once again this week like it suggests. Yes, you should be filing every week for PUA. As far as I know, that has not changed. That's always been been a constant. So, and it certainly doesn't hurt to file more than once. Trust me, they're not going to pay you twice. It's the government. But Carl, we might get some more guidance on that. That's unemployment. Gosh, that's a conversation for another day. Liquor tax in Philadelphia. Have you heard anything about any kind of relief program for those of us who are delinquent for the tax that would have been due by March 20th and April 20th? It would be nice to have some kind of interest-free ability to catch up Philly liquor tax over the next year. We have submitted to council and to the mayor's office a request that would allow you to have until the end of this year to pay off your liquor taxes. They have not moved on it yet, but we are going to take another run at it, recognizing that you don't have money to pay right now. So that is one of our priorities. We have submitted it. We will be pushing harder on that. The same applies, we're hoping to a certain extent with some state taxes as well, to give you a little bit more time to play catch up without all of the interest fees and penalties coming at you. Are we able to open fitness centers when we are in green phase? Yes, fitness centers at 50% occupancy are permitted to open in green phase, as are your indoor pools under CDC guidelines, because that's just the rule that I made since the governor's office won't answer that question. Can you address where the social clubs, American Legion, stand with grant programs, as we seem to have fell between the cracks? Yeah, Jack, the problem with the grant program so far is that, and it depends on what your code is, and the nonprofits generally, unless you're a 501c3, have really fallen between the cracks. That might be the hiccup there. But we can look at that. I would think that the restaurant grant program, like I said, don't bank on it. The one we're working on now, you would fall into that. But that's definitely something that has been a frustration, that as they're developing these grant programs, there are entire sectors of the industry that are not being covered or represented in this. So thanks, Jack. Thank you for flagging that for me. I will look into that a little bit more. Okay. I haven't finished the legislation for the grant program yet. When I finish it, I will share it with all of you. When it's filed, we will share it. The general definition we're working with restaurants right now is a tax code as it pertains to food and beverage operations. That's where it is right now. We could expand this to make it bigger, but then we will have $5,000 and $10,000 grants. So that's something that we want to think about as well. Or do we need to develop separate grant programs for separate industries? But like I said, once we get the grant program figured out, I have a call tomorrow at 11 a.m. with the sponsors of the bill to hammer out the details. And once it's filed, we will share it. And we still have to go through a legislative process, and they're not in session for the next possibly 2 to 3 months. So this is not an immediate influx of funds for anybody who would apply, because it doesn't even exist now. Can you ask employees to make up the paid not worked time? Susan, I'm not, maybe you can expand upon that. If somebody is getting paid leave under the Families First, no, but you get reimbursed for that. So I'm not, maybe we can talk offline, or Susan, you can send me another email for that one. I don't remember if any guidance suggestions for modification to employee handbooks regarding COVID-19 was put out. If so, could you provide a link to that? There hasn't been. There are some addendums that I think some businesses have looked to put into their employee handbook. Some have just been a memo, but there is no requirement from the government that you need to update your employee handbook. Now, you do need to follow the business guidance. You do need to post the sign regarding business guidance on your door. You do need to meet all of the business guidance as it pertains to employees if they're infected or anything like that. But there is no requirement for you to do that. But of course, some people are deciding to do that, whether it's a memo or an addendum of some sort. I know Hope replied to the HARP question already. Are face shields an acceptable alternative to masks for employees? Yes, as long as it is achieving the purpose of the mask. I'll put on my Secretary Levine hat. Your mask protects me and my mask protects you. So whether it's plastic, cloth, or some other version of barrier that is on a person's face to protect them from spreading it, I would say that would be an acceptable alternative to a mask for employees. Is there anything that can be done if you have multiple neighbors that are serving customers and guests at their bars? You can call the LCE and turn them in. If they're doing that in yellow, bars can be open in the green phase with social distancing, but if there is somebody that is breaking the rules, there's a form you can fill out on the governor's website where you can call the LCE and file a complaint that way. And that's the other thing. If you guys are going to break the rules, every day I have restaurants that are reaching out to me and saying this person's doing this. So everyone's keeping an eye on everyone. There's a lot of self-enforcement and other business enforcement here. Okay. I'm noticing that many restaurants in Lancaster have opened for indoor dining. We are in the yellow. Are they getting special permission? No, Carl, I would assume they're listening to some of those legislators who told them that they should do it. Lancaster is yellow. There is no allowance for any indoor dining whatsoever. So I would presume that they are just ignoring the guidelines and trying to operate as is, which of course, as I said, is a risk that people would be taking. But Lancaster, like I said, could get announced Friday to go green on next Friday, and then they could have indoor dining. This is a general question on masks versus shields. Are shields acceptable for servers? It could be friendlier for the customer, and I think I mentioned that, yes, shields would be acceptable in lieu of masks. Any update regarding front of house employees regarding if they count in the maximum occupancy for a private event? No update other than the governor's office re-clarified that they are included in the occupancy for a private event, a public event, or any event in between. So your employees that are on the floor in a ballroom are going to be subject to that occupancy. Your chefs that are back in the kitchen are not subject to that occupancy of that room. But anybody who is in the room, they are saying is included in that occupancy count. Regarding catering, where can I find the guidelines for hosts and guest lists? I think Ben already shared that, but it is guidance for businesses in the restaurant industry, and it is on the governor's website and probably 6 other places by the time we're done this webinar. And also in our daily update. It was in last week's update, and I will include it again today just because of that update as it pertains to hosts keeping a guest list. Is it really true that LCE and AG are enforcing restaurants? I've not seen any reports or evidence of it yet. It seems unfair to good operators that are following the rules. I'm sure you could probably, there are probably people on this call that could answer that, but yes, they are enforcing. LCE, I would say, is, I don't want to say the more forceful, but the LCE is the more strict of the two. I think, and Hope mentioned this, AG is trying to go the path of warnings. Everybody's trying to go the path of a warning. But if you continue to operate against the rules, that warning becomes some pretty hefty fines. And as I said, the potential to lose your license. So they are enforcing. I would say it's predominantly complaint driven that they're enforcing. But for those of you that started outdoor dining a few weeks ago, I think a lot of you got some visits from the LCE during that time. So they are out. Some are more strict than others, which is why we've worked so hard to really clarify some of these questions we've been getting asked. For the Department of Ag, have you considered making 2 or 3, more than one is important, so we can keep changing the stop signs, new signs that states employees need to wear masks, as simple as changing the background color or putting in the month at the top of the sign will show the restaurant is keeping current with the COVID guidance. I mean, we can, I don't know if changing a sign that says they have to wear masks from month to month makes a difference. I think having a sign saying that employees and guests need to wear masks is fine, but we can certainly see if that's something Department of Ag is looking at doing in terms of the complaints they're getting on that front. How does extension of premises work with streeteries, adjacent sidewalks, seating, street closures? So, Job, I did have a call with the city yesterday, and we're working on the streets, but what will need to happen is for restaurants in Philadelphia that are going to extend their liquor license premise, they will need a form letter of some sort from the city saying, we authorize businesses to extend onto city property. Now, if they're just extending their sidewalk cafe down the sidewalk in front of an adjacent business who gives them permission, in that scenario, they would not need a letter from the city. But if they're going onto the streets or you're shutting down the roads, when they submit for their extension of premise, they will need that kind of form letter from the city saying that they're granting permission for businesses to do that. My recommendation was just have a form letter, and the city would enforce when it would be allowed. I think that's going to be easier all around. And of course, businesses could extend their sidewalk without needing the letter. And then if 2 weeks later, the city says, we're going to shut down your street and you can extend out into the street, you can submit another extension of premise in that scenario with the letter attached. So I do know the city is working through that, but any extension onto, and this applies not even in Philadelphia, anywhere, if you're extending your premise onto a municipal or city property, you do need that form letter granting permission for you to do so. Okay, this is a long one today. If we can have a banquet with rounds of 10, 6 feet apart, does the same hold true for a meeting with no food and beverage, or at a meeting does each person need to be 6 feet apart? If you don't have food or beverage, you still need to ensure the social distancing piece. Now, that is to the best of your abilities. If people are standing around a room, you need signs that say they need to be socially distant. You can't have more than 250 people in a room. But if you're not serving food and beverage, some of these greater requirements don't necessarily apply. Okay, heard your caution regarding the strong enforcement of the 6 foot distance between tables shoulder to shoulder. Is that also the case for private discrete events for up to 25 people having a private party? In yellow, a customer wants to have a private party of 24 people seated outside, but we can't only make 5 foot distance, but we can only make 5 distance between tables shoulder to shoulder. Are we asking for trouble? The family wants to do it because they and their guests are consenting to be together. It's a risk. If it's a, I can tell you that the rules say you have to have 6 feet. If you don't, and it's for a private event and it's for 2 hours, or is the LCE going to swoop down, you know, from helicopters and bust you? I would think not. Is Ag going to do it? I'm sure Ag would love to swoop down from a helicopter, but it's a risk that you're taking. I can only tell you that the rule is 6 feet, so you need to calculate that risk. Our offices are in a multi-tenant building. I shared the business guidance on COVID. He is not following the guidance except for asking others to wear masks. Where do we speak to for proper guidance for him or inspection? There is a complaint form on the governor's website that you can submit if there is a business operating in violation of the business rules. So that would be the avenue, and then the governor's office would designate the appropriate enforcement agency to look into that. Okay. Our roof deck has 4 high walls, but a fully retractable roof. Is this considered outdoor dining? I would ship that to John if he was here, and he's not here anymore. I would be nervous on 4 walls, and I'd also be nervous, and I'll do this again. If you have garage doors that opens up maybe 2 sides of your restaurant, I would be careful about that as well. It depends also how high the walls are. I mean, if the walls, you might be okay, but we might need to double check that one. And I know John's been doing some due diligence on outdoor dining. So Ben, I know that came from you. Maybe you can follow up with John. I'm going to turn blue before I turn green. My restaurant borders, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. My restaurant borders is the state of Delaware, who is open and happily claiming our regulars. I worry I may not get all of them back if they find new and comfortable alternatives while our government drags its feet. Can we do any more to push our agenda before Friday's next briefing by continuing to write and call our elected officials, or is it a waste of energy since they are only going to default to county statistics? Sean, I forget what county you're in. I mean, my gut is that Chester's a little wonky right now because of all of the mushroom farms there. I think everybody else will flip to the 26th. I don't see any legislative action changing that. It's been very strict that it's announced the Friday before. So the ones that flip on the 26th will be announced this Friday to flip next Friday. So you can certainly continue to reach out to your legislators. I know the legislators are equally frustrated. Heck, they passed a resolution forcing the state to reopen. But unless the Supreme Court makes a decision within the next day or 2 that strikes down the governor's emergency declaration, there's not much that's going to change the process as it is right now. If an employee tests positive, you have to advise guests who are at that event. yes, if you're able to know, and that's part of the reason why we do have some people that are requiring reservations, and especially for that guest list. I am not sure if you need to advise them or if the Department of Health is going to be requesting that information to advise them. Like I said, the list maintaining piece just came out today, but I can have John follow up as to the outreach in terms of that for private events, public events. When somebody tests positive, there is going to be outreach from the state health department and or the county health department on who you should be contacting from there. Our contact list required for only full service catering or also for large drop-offs. In our case, we have picnic pavilions on premise. Do the picnic organizers need to keep contact lists if we simply drop off a casserole? I can only, private event spaces and wedding venues with food service must require event hosts to maintain a list of all guests. So reading that on its face, if you are providing food service to a group of people, they need to keep a guest list, including phone number and expected location 14 days after the event. I am not sure, Rick, in your scenario, because you are an amusement park, if you might have different standards, but that's just the requirements as I'm reading them, and that's really all I can do since that just came out today, and we haven't really been able to dig deep on that piece. Thank you, Michael. I still have to get over to Michael's restaurant for a margarita. Thank you, Jack. For a corporate function, does the 6-foot separation hold true if we're seating attendees in rounds? This is the thing that drives me crazy, not the question, Tom, just like the whole logic with all of this. They are saying if you're sitting a 10 top at a round table, that 10 top has to be 6 feet from the next 10 top. If you are sitting people individually in a corporate seating like classroom setting, they're saying that each individual has to be 6 feet apart. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense. I have asked that question, not as many times as I've asked the indoor pool and yellow question, but a lot of questions, and that is just where they are right now. So yeah, they're saying that if it's individuals, they have to be 6 feet apart. If they're rounds, the tables have to be 6 feet apart. So that's all I know, unfortunately. With the wedding ceremony and private hotel event space not open to the public, if the couple prepares assigned seating by family for the ceremony, does each chair still have to be 6 feet apart from one another, or can chairs be set up by the family? This is really why I want completely separate catering private event guidance, to truth be told. If it is a private room that you're not serving food and beverage, and they are setting it up by family, I would say that is a group of people, and that would be permissible. And like I said, do I think the LCE and AG are going to fly in from helicopters? No. But you also need to make sure you're meeting the rest of the requirements. If you're in green, no more than 250 people total. And if they're separated by family or things like that, I would say that would be okay. In green for a banquet, can we have displays? Fruit display or cookie table? The cookie table question. I am from the Southeast, so I have never experienced these infamous cookie tables of the western part of the state. But yes, we would consider that a buffet or self-service. So we believe that cookie tables would be permissible. I would be careful though with that. I would just be cognizant of the fact that if you might want to have people serving from the cookie table, you might want to ensure that people are hand sanitizing before they go through the cookie table. All of those are things you need to think about, but generally that would be considered a buffet, and that is permissible in green. The brewery has a conditional, you guys have so many questions today. The brewery has a conditional license and is not yet operating. Can they offer their space to be used for dining space for customers from neighboring restaurants? Would it endanger the future of their license? If it's not licensed at all, oh no, you have a conditional license. If you have a conditional license, then no, I would not do that. You can't roll over licenses. Now, if somebody is doing takeout, and you're letting them eat their takeout in your space and you're not providing service, I would say that's something you could think about. But you do not want another licensee to be providing service on your licensed premises because they could only be consuming your beverages in that scenario, not the beverages from the other licensee. Let's see. What if you have a plexiglass shield at the desk? Do we still need masks? Yes, employees should have masks at all times because what if the guest doesn't have a mask on? And I will, and Hope sent me a text message, and she probably sent me 6 more, but my phone's muted because it keeps on going off. This is the thing on the face masks. It's your guests that are reaching out to AG and LCE and complaining. So they might not be telling you, but they're turning you into the enforcement agency. So even if you have a plexiglass shield, it's the customers that are turning your employees in on that front. So, and the rules say you should have a plexiglass shield, especially if your customer isn't wearing a mask, but your employees should be wearing a mask at all times. I do an annual bridal show, winter, vendors and brides. What advice do you have, or do you think it should just not be something we should plan this year? This is like Pittsburgh's wedding gate that happened to me a few months ago. I cannot predict the future. I cannot predict where things are going to move. I cannot predict if we're going to have a spike in cases this fall. So honestly, you just need to talk with your vendors. If you can have a safe event, if 250 is the number right now. I cannot provide advice on any specific individual event or speculate because speculating literally gets me nowhere, especially because I'm usually wrong. So you're warned. What happens if it rains while guests are dining outside? Can we provide shelter in the restaurant? Technically, no. In yellow. Green, have at it. Just make sure you're trying to socially distance everybody. But there should be nobody congregating in the restaurant at any time. Now, like I said, if it's downpouring and your guests, need to go inside, I can only tell you what the rules are. And I can tell you that is your license going to get pulled because you have people standing inside while they're waiting for the rain to end? No. I can just tell you what the rules are, and it's that people cannot be inside the restaurant. Also, what happens if we're still under restrictions when the weather gets cooler? Will tents, heat lamps, etc. be permitted on sidewalks? That is going to be a question for your municipality if that's something that they would allow. So for things like that, in terms of tents, heat lamps, that's all a municipal conversation that I'm sure we might have to have. Hopefully we don't. Hopefully we're all back to normal. That's just because I never want to do this again, and I want to be back to normal as soon as possible. But that's going to be just a decision that's going to have to occur with your municipality in terms of being on public space and zoning. And that's another issue we've been hearing from. Some municipalities are not as favorable to an extension in terms of just letting you do it. There are some requirements they're putting in place. So you should cross-check that with your zoning officer as well. And I think that is all I have in my brain for today.
I think that concludes our webinar for today. They took you through your steps today. Again, thank you for joining us today. And we did record this, and we will put this up onto our website, and we will be sending this along to you as a recording for future reference. Melissa, thank you very much, and good luck today. Everybody have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.